You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome to my podcast, Inspire Change with Gunter. That's me. Now, in the last episode, I talked about fairy tales that we tell ourselves, and essentially I was talking about negative narratives. And so I want to carry on with that theme, but I want to talk to all you dads out there, basically, because I'm very much in favour that we as fathers need to be very involved in our children's lives and bringing them up. Now, we also want to give them a really good platform to start with. But in order to do that, I, as the dad, need to understand myself significantly better than what it appears that some dads do. So let me firstly start by defining again, for all of those of you who haven't heard the previous podcast, what negative narratives are. Now, I used the metaphor of fairy tales, negative fairy tales. That we tell ourselves stories that have no basis in reality, really. And so, my premise is that whatever negative narrative that I have running in my head is fundamentally not just going to affect me, but it's also going to leak out into my relationships. That is with my partner, but most importantly, it is also with my children. Okay? So let me define what I mean by negative narratives. And these are thoughts and beliefs we have about ourselves that are self-critical, pessimistic, and mostly untrue. As a dad, negative self-talk can lead to self-doubt and anxiety. And this, as if in this day and age, we need to feel more anxious than what often we already are. So one of the problems with that is that it makes me less confident in my parenting. Now, for those of you who've got teenagers, let me remind you that teenagers, well, basically all children, but especially teenagers, are opportunistic. And if they can sniff out your Achilles heel, they will go for it, whether you like it or not. It's a fact. Okay, so at that point, my capacity to influence and parent my teen is going to go out the window. But it also means that I'm not going to really be able to meet my child's needs effectively. And a lot of times lead to me feeling completely overwhelmed or hopeless when I'm facing challenges. And all of those of you parents out there who think that parenting should run without challenges, you need to think again. The moment you have children, your life is going to fundamentally change. If it doesn't, we've got a problem. You need to look for the canary in the coal mine. Because at some point, you are going to find a dead budgie. And at that point, it's not pretty. But let me roll on with this. So, additionally to the sort of thoughts and beliefs, we talk about negative self-talk. Again, leaning to self-criticism, self-denigration. And one of the things that I see parents often do with that, especially dads, is we translate that into being overly critical with our kids as well. I might have unrealistic expectation or be too quick to point out my child's flaws. And, in the child, that can lead to feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem. And, we're here to actually help build them up, not in an arrogant or narcissistic way, but for them to feel secure and safe and self assured enough to participate effectively in the world. So, negative narratives can also impact on a father's ability to provide a supportive and nurturing environment for their kids. If you as a dad is constantly thinking negatively about yourself or the world around you, then you're probably struggling to create a positive and loving environment for your kids to grow up in. So, how does this negative narrative then particularly impact on us as dads? Well, I'm going to talk about a number of sort of paternal styles, as it were. So, the type of dad stemming from these negative narratives. Okay, so the first one that I want to focus on a little bit is the perfectionistic father. This is a dad who internalizes the narrative that he has to be perfect in everything he does, and therefore will put too much pressure on himself, firstly, but also on his son to excel in every area of life. Now we know, and I've spoken about this, perfectionism is bad news. It leads to procrastination, anxiety, low self-esteem, all sorts of stuff. And being or attempting to be perfect is not going to alleviate the problem. In fact, it's going to make it worse. You are reaching or trying to reach for the unattainable. Now, as a perfectionistic dad, I'm also going to be overly critical of my son's mistakes or my daughter's mistakes. And then that leads to feelings of shame. And again, we talk about low self esteem. So the impact of this is going to be some sort of cost to my child's mental health and the development of my child's healthy sense of self. Now, remember, my job as a parent is to help formulate a place in which my child feels safe and secure and open enough to really engage with me. Now, as that child develops, I want that child to internalize that capacity so they begin to have a safe and secure attachment to themselves. So, again, those of you who've been following my podcasts are going to hear the whole process of attachment style. Okay, another sort of dad that we've got going is the absent father. So this is a dad who fundamentally internalizes the narrative that he just isn't good enough, and therefore he needs to withdraw from his sons, emotionally or physically. Also works with daughters. A lot of dads withdraw from daughters, especially around 12, 13. And if they're uncomfortable with women to some degree, and I'm not talking sexually, I'm just talking about sort of negative narratives that I get from a lot of, young men about how women can be, overbearing, dominating, threatening, all that sort of stuff, which in a lot of cases women just aren't. It's something that we might be projecting into the world. So, in that relationship where the dad's absent, that father son is also going to internalize that negative narrative and begin to feel that he too is not good enough to deserve his father's attention or love. So, what's going to take a hit? Self-worth and his ability to form healthy relationships in the future. The next dad is the overly controlling father. Now, this is where I drop back into the conversation about patriarchy. Okay, so if I have a dad who's been really deeply, socialized into the patriarchal model of masculinity, then he wants to dominate and he wants to control. The idea that I, as a dad, always need to be in control will represent itself in being overly controlling of my child's behavior and that kid's decisions. So what's going to happen? Well, the kid's going to grow up believing that she has no agency or control over his own life. So the father also in that situation may be critical of his son's choices and belittle him for making mistakes. You know, shaming your son especially is not a good thing to do. You know, that is a definite guarantee for future therapy. If that boy grows into a man who needs to function appropriately in the world. You know, we don't dominate and control people. Doesn't matter whether it's my wife, my partner, my kids, my reports in business. We need to work with people. And so as a father, I really need to take stock of what I'm listening to in my head and be critically analytical of that. Okay, the next style that I often see is the emotionally distant father. Now, that's essentially very similar to the absent dad, but the emotionally distant father could actually be practically on deck, right? So, taking his son or his daughter to sporting events, being there for, the concerts and all that, but they don't demonstrate a great deal of emotion. Um, and the repertoire comes out of the patriarchal ideal that a male, a man, a father needs to be strong and unemotional, and so he will not express a great deal of emotion to his child, but rather internalize a lot of it. So the kid grows up basically seeing dad almost as a two-dimensional being. Um, and the cost to that is the child, let's talk about sons, ability to develop emotional intelligence to form healthy relationships in the future. A lot of boys that grow up with a dad like that are probably going to be uncomfortable with expressing their own emotion unless it's anger and rage. That one often comes out despite themselves. And so, in this process, one of the things that, boys in particular begin to experience is a sense of emotional isolation. They can be with people, but they don't feel like they're connecting with people. Okay, the next one is the overly competitive father. This is a dad who internalizes the narrative that he must always win. So, again, the patriarchal socialization comes out in this that life is a competition, and if you're going to be successful, you must always win. And you must be the best. And you must give that message to your son because that's what a good father does. So, the problem with that is that it can lead to father and son feeling like they're in competition with one another. And the boy begins to learn not to enjoy his own accomplishments. And the dad then gets into feeling like, in order for that boy to be more successful, he needs to really put some pressure on. You got to get out there and win. You got to participate in everything. And this restricts often boys' capacity to choose what they really want to do as opposed to what dad wants me to do. And again, this is not really healthy. So, in that context, there are a few examples that I wanted to give you to take a look at you as a dad. There's lots of permutations on this. So, it's like, what other narratives have you got going in your head? Are they in conflict with one another? For some fathers, they expect everybody else to work really, really hard, but they don't necessarily put effort into where it counts themselves. So they could be good at work, but they're not necessarily present at home, or vice versa. They might be really good at home, but they've chosen not to live up to their own potential. And that's a very sad story in of itself. I work with a lot of men who are capable of a lot of things, a lot of great things, but their belief in themselves is so low that they don't really test themselves. They fear failure. And in some instances, not only do they fear failure, but they also fear success. They don't know what to do with this stuff. Now, again, if you as a dad are going through any of this, then the chances are that your son especially will begin to pick up on this. They will begin to either rebel, push against it, or they will comply in a sense. Subconsciously, we fall into similar things. I mean, one of the things I often talk about is as a parent, I remember the first time I was really challenged in a situation with my daughter. I I opened my mouth and my dad came out. And my dad was very verbal and he was also very loud at times. And that's not really what I wanted my daughter to experience. I didn't want her to be scared of me. So, I need to sort of step back and reflect and go, okay, I need to change this. I need to change me. I need to be more aware of what's going on in my own head. So, again, we come back to what do I do with this? Practice self awareness. Challenge your negative thinking. Practice some self compassion. Give yourself a go. You're doing the best that you can. Most kids didn't come with an instruction manual telling us what to do. One of the things that is also important is to reframe your perspective on stuff. Most of the time when we expect catastrophes to happen, they don't. Learn from that. Yes, we could go, okay, as part of my sort of life risk management, think about the worst thing, then put it aside and see what happens. But one of the things I want to talk about as a final round on this particular topic is, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about different sort of attachment styles, but the thing that I want to leave dads with this, you dads out there, if you're really struggling, get some professional help. It's not a sign of weakness or shame. It can only help you, but it will help those who you are in relationship with. And I think that's the biggest gift we can give to others. That is when a lot of us as good men become great, when we actually dip our hand into the can of worms and unpack them and look at, what are we really about deep down? And in most cases, most of us as men are not bad. Don't take on that narrative. It's a social meme that may be going around, but it is untrue. Fortunately, some men are seduced to the dark side where we get this misogynistic rubbish peddled by people like, Andrew Tate, the incels, the pickup artists. Stay away from that stuff. That is just poison. If you believe that women are the enemy, you need to do a retake. Because if you believe that, think about how you're going to deal with your daughter, let alone your son. Do you want your son to walk into the world with a negative attitude, a negative narrative about women in his head, or do you want him to seek out relationships wherein he can be happy, wherein he can determine what's healthy for him and not? So on that note, I'm going to sign off, and until next time, we pick up with some more stuff about dads and attachment. This is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda at noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.